Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Today we're going to talk about a number of headlines, both directly and indirectly related to Bible prophecy, so let's dive right in. This first one is from the website 1945. It says, could Russia's sudden Ukraine retreat mean a tactical nuclear weapon strike is coming? And this is important because we're reading a lot in the news these last several days of the Russians retreating, Russia is losing, and in the fog of war, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on. So this is something we need to pay careful attention to. This says how the situation in Ukraine could get far more dangerous. After days of a withering Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Russian Defense Ministry announced that it was withdrawing its forces from two areas in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. In a video statement, Ukrainian President Zelensky quipped, "The Russian army in these days is demonstrating the best that it can do, showing its back." Ukrainians celebrated, and rightly so, while Russian spokesmen said that Russian forces were repositioning ahead of a new offensive. Reporters on the ground cast doubt on such pronouncements, both because they mirror Russian statements as it abandoned its drive toward Kyiv, and also because Russian forces left in such great haste that they left numerous arms and equipment behind. Western officials are understandably happy. This Ukrainian progress shows the bravery, skills, and determination of Ukrainian forces, and it shows that our support is making a difference every day on the battlefield, NATO Secretary General said in a September 9th press conference. Reflecting on his recent trip to Ukraine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken observed at the same press conference, even as President Putin threw as much as he could against Ukraine earlier this summer, Ukraine absorbed the blow and is now pushing back. While it is right to celebrate the Russian rout, the war may be entering a far more dangerous phase. Consider, if Russian President Vladimir Putin, tired of attrition and decided to use tactical nuclear weapons, how would Russian behavior, a rapid withdrawal, and even leaving key equipment behind, be different? The answer, it would not be. So what they're saying here is, yes, we really don't know. There's propaganda coming from Russia. There's propaganda coming from the West. That's not necessarily bad in a war. You're trying to win at any cost against your enemy. But as a news consumer, we don't necessarily know what's really going on just from reading a news article. We have to sort of read between the lines. So while this could be a massive Ukrainian victory that's pushing Russia out of Ukraine and pushing them backward into retreat, it could be that Russia is retreating in order to get its forces out of the way of a tactical nuclear strike. It could also be that it really is a victory. And again, if there are news reports out there that Vladimir Putin, there's pressure within Russia for him to step down from his role, to resign, to leave office, we know that cornered animals lash out. So what could happen here? No matter what's happening in this scenario, whether it's Russia retreating on purpose, strategically, or because they're being defeated, this runs a risk that it could lead to a nuclear conflict. I've also read other stories that say they believe Russian forces were outnumbered 8-1, and it makes you wonder, well, why 8-1 now? Where are these new Ukrainian forces coming from? And there's also reports that there are Western special forces on the ground, or these people that volunteered their time who are retired from special forces and within NATO, or is NATO actually engaged on the ground? And if they are, that would be considered a major escalation of the war that could lead to who knows what happening from Russia. Now, keep in mind, in 2019, many people participated in a simulation between a war between Russia and NATO, with the conflict beginning in Ukraine, and that resulted in a nuclear exchange that led to 1 billion people dead in that simulation. So this is nothing to play around with. It's something we need to keep an eye on. But we can't necessarily read the news and believe that what appears to be true today is the real story, and that it may not lead to the outcome that we hope for. So we need to really keep our eyes on this message, or on this news story. Next we have, this is from the National. It says Glasgow City Council to introduce warm banks for freezing Scots this winter. Glasgow will establish warm banks this winter after councillors voted unanimously to implement the measure across the city. The Scottish Greens said their motion will save lives ahead of a potentially deadly winter, with thousands likely to go cold due to skyrocketing energy prices. With warm banks, similar to food banks but for people in fuel poverty, they'll see public spaces used by residents unable to heat their homes during the colder months. Glasgow City Council has been instructed to set up a network that includes its own buildings and those of arm's-length bodies such as Glasgow Life, with local politicians saying it could also include buildings from faith communities and the third sector. The council said it will look for suitable sites for warm banks in the coming months. Scottish Green councillor Blair Anderson said the measure was needed as the cost of living crisis turns into a humanitarian disaster. He said, "During the summer heat waves, I had constituents telling me they were scared to use fans for fear of the bills. Extreme weather is becoming the norm, and if there's a cold snap, there's a real chance that people will become severely unwell or even freeze to death this winter. Every level of government needs to be doing what we can to stop this crisis from escalating even further and to save lives this winter. That's why we proposed warm banks and why Greens and government are freezing rents, banning evictions, and putting billions into cost of living relief." So guys, we see how dire the situation is getting in Europe. We've been over this a number of times. And once again, the proposed solution is government intervention, government interference with the free market. We're going to freeze rents, ban evictions. We're going to put price caps on energy. We're going to subsidize energy bills. None of this is going to work the way that it's intended, because once again, governments cannot simply print or sign a piece of legislation and create more energy. And the problem here is a lack of energy. It's not a lack of funds to pay for energy or currency to pay for rent. It is a lack of energy. And so the way to alleviate that is to produce more energy. But government is standing in the way of that, and it's causing enormous problems. So here we go into this next story. This is from oilprice.com. It says Europe's natural gas shortage could trigger a food crisis. So it's not just an energy crisis that's going to lead to people being cold this winter. It's leading to people also not being able to feed themselves. It says the problem with an energy crisis is that it's actually an everything crisis. In a world where virtually every industry relies on energy in some form, runaway inflation is an inevitability. This phenomenon is not news. You've been experiencing it for the better part of 2 years now. But while global governments are using every tool in their kits to curb the rising inflation rates, there's far less they can do about the coming food shortage. For months, the agricultural industry has been warning the rest of the world that next year's food production is severely threatened as the fertilizer industry is in shambles. Industrial NPK fertilizers, so named for their makeup of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium oxide, are heavily reliant on natural gas supplies. About 70% of the cost of fertilizer production is solely the price of natural gas, which is used in liberal amounts to make the ammonia phosphate slurries that turn into fertilizer. Indeed, according to CRU Group, European fertilizer producers in the region are currently losing approximately $2,000 for every ton of ammonia produced. So as Russia has stemmed and then indefinitely stopped the flow of natural gas into Europe, sending gas prices through the roof, the continent's fertilizer sector has halted as much as 70% of its production capacity. This is an enormously scary figure. Commercial fertilizer plays an essential role in 40 to 60% of the world's food production. So we've been talking about this all year. This is a major problem. Even before the war in Ukraine, the rising price of natural gas had caused production of fertilizer to decrease, which caused a shortage of supply. It caused the price to go up, which meant that not as much fertilizer was applied, and we're seeing lower yields as we speak across the world because of that. So we scroll down, we read more. It says, back in July, when gas prices were much lower and the food security situation wasn't nearly as dire as it is now, the International Fertilizer Association estimated that if Russia's war in Ukraine is prolonged and high gas prices continue to drive down the use of fertilizers, nearly 2% of global corn, wheat, rice, and soybean production could be lost. Even small declines in the production of grain can result in significant price increases, Newsweek reports. As always, the poorest countries will pay the biggest price. This summer's grain squeeze in Africa will pale in comparison to the food crises likely to hit African nations, Mexico, and other developing countries with large input-reliant agricultural sectors. So why doesn't the world simply direct more dollars and gas toward fertilizer, considering how much is at stake? Countries can't mandate fertilizer production because they're so worried about having enough natural gas to heat people's homes, John Harpool, a natural gas broker for the fertilizer sector, told Newsweek. They are having to choose between future food production and heat, and they are going to choose heat. So, guys, there's no way to read that last sentence other than the choice is, would you rather freeze in the wintertime or starve in the springtime? And since winter comes before spring, we're going to choose starve in the spring. We're going to procrastinate, push the problem off into the future. But this is a false choice. This is not the choice that God gave us. This is the choice that human policies gave us. These government policies that are restricting energy production at almost every level. In Germany right now, they are shutting down nuclear power plants. Not 5 years ago, not before the war in Ukraine, but right now they are making the choice, yes, shut them down because they're not green enough. And this war that's been going on for years, for decades, against fossil fuels, against coal, oil, and natural gas, this is where it has gotten us. If it weren't for that war, if it weren't for the government regulation and the government banning of those energy sources, cutting back the exploration, cutting back the production, cutting back the supply, we would have an abundant amount of energy to warm homes in the winter, cool them in the summer, and produce food all over the planet for everyone to eat. So it's a false choice when they're saying they're having to choose between future food production and heat, and they're going to choose heat. Well, why do they have to make that choice? They have to make that choice because they've made all these bad choices in the past. And now they're acting like, well, it always had to be this way. No, it didn't have to be this way, and you need to remember that when you go to the ballot box in all of these countries. This is from Politico. It says, enormous fertilizer shortage spells disaster for global food crisis. A global fertilizer crunch is threatening to further starve a planet that's already going hungry. Officials at the United Nations and beyond are stepping up warnings about the mounting crisis for fertilizers, an essential substance to boost soil fertility, as vulnerable countries in areas such as Africa grapple with prices that have soared by 300% since Russia's war in Ukraine began. The continent, where smallholder farmers feed the majority of people, is already lacking 2 million metric tons of fertilizer, according to the African Development Bank. The high price of fertilizers will mean less food at a time when people need it most, with more frequent bouts of extreme weather and the Ukraine war still leaving import-dependent countries insecure. Farmers in Europe are feeling similar strains, though to a lesser degree. Now keep in mind, in Africa, they don't have these large agricultural conglomerates like some countries have. They are mostly fed by small family farms, thousands and thousands of these farms, some as small as a few acres. It's very decentralized. It's not a centralized operation. So you might have a farmer who in the past spent $100 a year on fertilizer. Now the price has gone up to $400 or $500 for the same amount of fertilizer. Well, they have a choice to make. They can either just buy what they can for $100. They can't go out, and they don't necessarily have the savings to just pay the $500 or to go to a bank and get a loan for it. All they have is the $100. That's all that's in their budget, and so that's all they're going to get, which means they're going to get 1/5 of the yield. They may only use that just to feed their own families and not others. And you can't, the USDA, when they give out these projections of what type of food the world's going to produce this year, they're just looking at past projections and what happened in the past. And they aren't taking this into account because they're not on the ground and they don't know what's going on. So it goes on, it says, we are really starting to yell from every tower that there's a fertilizer crisis, and the fertilizer crisis is enormous, said one UN official who spoke on condition of anonymity. The African Development Bank said in May that many African countries have already seen price hikes in bread and other food items, warning that if this deficit is not made up, food production in Africa will decline by at least 20%. And the continent could lose over $11 billion in food production value. David Beasley, executive director of the UN World Food Program, said he thought the 20% estimate could be very low. There's 980 million people inside Africa that depend on the smallholder farms and the fertilizer to reach them, and we're working on these issues as we speak, Beasley told the U.S. Congress last month. Again, when the USDA puts out these projections, they can't possibly know what's happening on all of these thousands and thousands of family-owned farms. So with all of its problems, I would take the UN's word over the USDA just because the UN does have people on the ground there working on these problems. So they're seeing the day-to-day operating of some of these farms, and they know the problems they're encountering getting a hold of fertilizer, being able to afford fertilizer, and that's going to lead to a deficit. If there is a 20% or more decline in African food production, that has to be made up somewhere. That means that Africa is going to want to import more food. Well, guess what? We've had drought in the United States. So the United States is going to want to export less or import more. They've had massive drought in Europe. Europe is going to say, well, no problem, we'll just import more food. Ukraine is in a war footing, so they're not able to export what they did before. And all those countries that were relying on them said, well, no problem, we'll just import that food from somewhere else. China is experiencing drought, and Pakistan has had massive floods, and on and on and on. All the countries in the world cannot be net importers of food at the same time. Somebody has to be exporting that food. Who is that going to be? I don't know the answer. I haven't seen an answer to that yet. And I think that this isn't getting enough attention by the mainstream media, that there is a famine coming, as we've been saying, as we go into the end of this year and into 2023. There is not going to be enough food in the world to feed everyone. And unfortunately, that's going to get worse because of the energy crisis that's going on in Europe is shutting down fertilizer production. And about a third of the world's fertilizer production takes place in Europe. And by the end of the year, it may be completely gone. And you can't count on factories in other parts of the world to make up for that. They may not have the capacity to do that. So at any price, we may not have enough fertilizer to grow the food that we need in 2023 and 2024, and who knows how long into the future, because of the cascading effect of these terrible energy policies in Europe and elsewhere that have put us in this situation. And it goes on. We read this. This is from the UK. It says supermarkets hire meat monitors because thefts of expensive cuts have risen. Supermarkets have enlisted staff to protect expensive cuts of meat due to increased shoplifting sparked by the cost of living crisis, according to a new report. The upmarket stores in Maidenhead were forced to act after losing thousands of pounds worth of stock every week. The Berkshire Towns manager, Robin Bunyan, said the significant spike in thefts suffered by major retailers is thought to have been brought about by rising food costs. Ms. Bunyan said supermarkets have been forced to employ meat monitors to watch over expensive cuts, with the town's larger stores, such as Waitrose and Marks & Spencer, said to be most impacted. And it goes on, it says, the forum heard that criminals were bold and would threaten staff if they were stopped from leaving a store with stolen products. So there you go, guys. Welcome to the era of meat monitors. I mean, this is what they have brought us to through these insane policies where food and energy are no longer abundant as they once were in some of these countries like the UK, where they've probably never experienced this before, and people are driven to desperate measures to steal food just to survive and to get by. So now we live in the era of meat monitors, not a phrase I thought I would ever hear or know what it meant, but you have to laugh at this stuff because you can't just be brought down by this never-ending barrage of terrible news. And so on that note, I want to turn to this tweet from Wall Street Silver. It says, this blueberry muffin I ordered, I guess I should have specified blueberries, hashtag shrinkflation. And then we see there, muffin has one blueberry. So this is what they brought us to, guys. Blueberry muffins with a single blueberry and meat monitors. Welcome to your future. This is why, guys, this is all the result of these government policies, and this is why the Bible, specifically the books of Daniel and the book of Revelation, describe governments. When God describes governments, he describes them as beast, terrible beast that devour and trample upon people and the free enterprise and creativity and freedom and liberty of the people. And then we end up with misery. That's why the Bible describes governments as beasts. So, we could be down about this, or we could laugh at it over single blueberry muffins, but we could also have joy because the Bible also tells us that a new government is coming. Between now and that new government coming, there's going to be a lot of misery, but when that new government comes, that government will be a monarchy, and Jesus Christ will be our ruler. And you won't have blueberry muffins with a single blueberry, and nobody will be stealing meat, and there will be plenty of food and energy for everyone. And the lion and the lamb will lie together, and babies will play with cobras, and you will get to enjoy the fruits of your labor under the shade of your own tree, and God will be with you. God will be with you. You will live in the presence of Almighty God. So keep that as your joy in these times. Focus on that. Focus on him. Focus on the work that we have to do because he's coming soon. Guys, we have a lot to be thankful for, a lot to be joyful for in these times. So make sure to like this, share this, and God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.